This is another episode from Tales from the Hangar with yours truly, Captain Don. Good morning, Phil. Sure nice to see you.
Good morning,
This
Don.
This is Colonel Phil Adair, retired United States Air Force of World War II fame. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I was in World War II. I was there.
Yeah. Well, you're sure looking good this morning, Phil. Tell me, I believe you told me you're a farm boy. Is that correct?
Yes, I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma. You know, most people live in a house with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. I lived in a house with 3 rooms that you could call bedrooms and 2 paths, one to the well and one to the outhouse.
Okay.
I lived on a farm until I was 17 years old.
Well, now, I guess, what year were you born?
1920.
1920. Well, you're 90 years old, man.
Oh, yes.
You really look good. My gosh.
The world has been kind to me.
Well, yes, I'm sure it has. I know you had a phenomenal experiences. Well, now your father, did he farm with horses, mules, or did he have a tractor?
Horses and mules most of his life. For the last 2 years of his real farming, he had 2 tractors. The first one's in the country there. Mm-hmm. That was just before the big crash.
When you talk about the big crash, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about 1929, when the stock market went down and almost everybody lost most of what they had, including us.
Yeah.
We downsized from a little over 1,500 acres we were farming to 160.
Boy, 1,500 acres in those years was a big ranch, so.
It was. Took a lot of people during the harvest season to take care of everything.
I was curious to where you were and what you were doing when you heard about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor.
I was going through flight training. Actually, I had just finished
flight
training.
You're already in the military.
No, I was in the civilian pilot training program.
I see.
At General Breeze Field at the University of Laramie in Wyoming. Had been flying Waco UPF-7s and the Cessna 140.
Well, it happens to be a Waco UPF-7 sitting right out there. You've seen those before.
That's why I say that's a beautiful airplane.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun flying that.
How did you get out from Oklahoma all the way to Wyoming?
Well, when I graduated from high school in 1937, the only work I could find would pay 25 cents a day most of the time, 50 cents if I got real lucky. You worked from daylight to dark and brought your own lunch.
Track out there? How'd you get out to Wyoming?
No, I went by train in 1937 in December and lived in a boarding house there. I worked there for 4 years, and during that 4-year period, I worked real hard in the civilian pilot training program to earn my wings and my private license, and offered a contract to go to work for Plains Airways after I finished at the end of November 1941. But then,
well, that was unusual. That was unusual for anybody to have a pilot's license in those days.
Yes, it was. I was lucky. Like I say, the world has been kind to me. I had tried to get in the Air Corps before that, but they looked at me and said, well, Sonny, go get a college education and come back, and maybe we'll talk to you then. Of course, they might as well have said, go take a trip to the moon and come back.
Yeah. You're in flight school, and you heard about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor.
Actually, I had just finished flight school and was waiting to go to another scholarship with the Plains Airways. And of course, before Pearl Harbor, the Air Corps wouldn't talk to us about joining the Air Corps unless we had a college education. But all of a sudden, right after December the 7th, they weren't quite so picky. And they said, well, if you can pass our written exam, see lightning and hear thunder, we'll take you. And that's how I got in the Air Corps.
Well, okay, then what was your first base?
Actually, as a cadet, before I flew in the Air Corps, it was at Higley Field, Williams, Arizona. And from there, the first flight training school was at Chino, which they called Ontario Air Base, but it actually was at Chino, which was a Jack Moseley Flying School, and they taught primary and basic, and I finished primary and basic there. And then I went to advanced at Luke
Which
Field.
was real good training. When you come into the Air Force, how much total time did you have by then?
Oh,
40 or 50 hours?
Probably about 500 hours.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Oh, man, you had been working at it.
yes.
Well, you must have been...
When I'll back up now. Between 400 and 500 hours, that included basic through advanced training in the Air Corps. So
Yeah,
I
but
probably
you
got
were...
275 hours in those 3 courses.
Well, you were the hot shot of the base then.
I managed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell me what happened next. Where'd you go next?
Went to Mitchell Field in New York. Actually, we were put up first just outside of the factory, Republic factory at Farmingdale in tar paper shacks. And eventually, we were quartered on the base at Mitchell flying P-47s, training to go to England.
Flying P-47s. Well, that must have been a big step for you. That's a big airplane.
I never will forget the first time I took off in a P-47. You had to use the brakes to taxi, and my legs that were cramping from using the brakes. I got on the runway, lined it up, hit the throttle, and the first thing I knew, I was airborne.
Yeah.
I got the gear up, and I thought, my God, I've got this thing in the air. How am I ever going to get it back on the ground?
No, well, now what do I do? Yeah, what do I do now?
Well, as it turned out, it was quite easy. It's a stable airplane, controlled very well, and luckily I'd had some experience with different airplanes, so
Well,
it turned out to be just another airplane.
you'd flown a lot of airplanes that were blind in front. The Waco and the Stearmans weren't easy to see out the front, you know. Well, and you're training to go to England. And these are brand new airplanes, I presume.
They were. We had the Bs, and there were a lot of technical problems involved with the airplane the Republic was trying to fix. We worked pretty closely with the Republic test pilots and the factory to make the changes that were necessary to get rid of some of the glitches that were involved with the early P-47s.
Okay, then tell me what happened next.
Well, we had a little over half of our equipment loaded on board the ship to go to England. I'd test flown the airplane I was supposed to take over there. At 2:30 in the morning, one night, the group commander got a call, and by 8 o'clock, every pilot, plus a good number of ground crews, was on a train at Hempstead, down to Byrd Field in Richmond. And we had to check out in P-40s and get a lot of day and night time flying at P-40. And General Arnold met us down there, and he said, "You're not going to like what I'm..."
This is Hap Arnold. This is Hap Arnold.
Yeah. Wearing a regular jodhpurs and carrying a riding whip. Looked like he should have been playing polo.
Yeah.
A prince of a guy.
I had heard
that. He said, "I can't tell you where you're going, but what you're going to do is important." And he said, that's the reason you're going to be flying P-40s. So we got on the boat.
Well, now, were you disappointed or not, or did you even care? Or did it make a difference? You just put me in there and let me fight, huh?
Well, I wanted to go fight the Germans in P-47s.
Well, they're training in P-40s. How much time did you get in the P-40?
I think about 20 hours. We flew around the clock.
Well, it was all concentrated training, and I know that's very valuable, but boy, 15 or 20 hours don't seem like much time to send a man into combat, but we were in a hurry.
Well, that's true. It wasn't so much training for combat as it was just to get experience handling the airplane. That's all it amounted to.
Well, yeah, you had to
already ready to.
You had to get it up and down.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My last flight was at 2:30 in the morning, and it had a Rolls-built Merlin engine in it. I hate to tell you this, but it quit on me on the downwind leg, and I had to dead stick it in at 2:30 in the morning. That was my last.
And you hadn't much night experience at all by that time, probably.
Oh yeah,
few maybe.
Night experience.
Well, why did
that training, and also at Mitchell Field in P-47?
Well, why did this engine quit?
I don't know. I didn't stick around to find out.
But she just quit cold.
It quit cold, just like turning off the switch.
Well, that was a dirty trick. Well, I know that they had a lot of accidents in those years of just mechanical things, and well, then you're getting ready to ship overseas. Is that what comes next?
Yes. From there, we went by boat to Karachi, India. It was India at the time instead of Pakistan. Then we picked up our P-40s that were in crates, assembled them, flew them up into the Assam Valley, up in the northeastern part of India. And there we flew protection for transports that were flying fuel, supplies, ammunition, everything that the 14th Air Force needed over the hump into China. The first part of the trip over on the troop ship was aboard the British Mauritania, which was converted to a troop ship from a passenger ship. We had 11,000 troops on there. We spent 40 days on board.
11,000 troops.
11,000 troops. And after 2 unsuccessful attempts to go through the canal, we were chased back at the Gold Coast by German subs, refueled in South America twice, and eventually wound up in the harbor at Cape Town. While we were there, we refueled, reprovisioned. On the way out, the German subs penetrated the harbor defenses, and they sunk 6 cargo ships in the harbor while we were making our way out. I opened the porthole to look out, and I saw a Liberty ship with a hole through it you could sail through with a sailboat without scratching anything. And we finally got out. They chased us south so far that we were in frigid waters way down south. The water was splashing up on the superstructure, and it accumulated so much we were afraid it was going to topple the ship. Eventually we lost them. And it came back into Diego Juarez, refueled there, repositioned, went to Sri Lanka, which was Ceylon at the time. And there we transferred to an Australian ship. We were on that for 3 days while we went to Bombay, and from Bombay we got on another British ship that had been bombed by the Japanese and was in pretty bad shape. It took us 8 days to go from Bombay to Karachi. Part of the time at 7.5 knots, running on one engine.
Well, now tell me, you say you stopped for fuel. Was this a diesel or was it coal burning?
It was diesel.
Yeah.
Yes, it was diesel.
Must have been a hell of a trip. My God.
It was, yeah.
Well, were the troops wore out when they got to their destination, or did they survive it pretty well, I guess? Everybody's young.
Amazingly, they survived pretty well. Our troops were down in hold D9, which is on the aft end of the ship next to where the propellers go out. And it was noisy.
I was going to say noisy and hot.
And we took turns. The aircrew members took turns going down and sitting with them, just to try to keep them cheered up, because they were trapped down there. They couldn't get out much. They got maybe an hour on the deck in a 24-hour period.
Oh, wow. Well, could the guys play cards and things, or just read a little bit?
They were in hammocks. They might have been able to play cards some, but I think they were more interested in just surviving.
Surviving. Yeah, I can imagine. Okay, now your first base was in India or China?
Well, our first base was at the Malheur containment, where we picked up our P-40s. From there, we flew up into the valley to a very small strip that we call Popeye. It was maybe 2,800 feet. It was just a patch of grass.
Oh, really? 2,800 feet with a P-40.
But it was right next to a transport base, Secreting, which they were just finishing the concrete runway on. So we would find land at Popeye, refuel and load bombs or whatever at Secreting, and then take off the mission there and then come back to Popeye again. That was the first base.
Well, you know, that's a Piper Cub field.
Tell me about it.
You know, you had to get in, you had to cross the fence right on the numbers and get on the brakes and get stopped.
That's right. Yeah.
I had no idea that a P-40 would operate in that length of field.
Well, eventually we went to our primary base, which was called Nagaguli, and it was adjacent to the air depot base at Moenbury that had a 5,000-foot runway. Our field was a grass strip 100 feet wide and 3,126 feet long. And at the end of it was the Brahmaputra River. So
you had to go.
You needed to be able to be on flying when you got off of it.
Well, what was your first mission like?
Oh, that would take me back to Secreting. And the first, what I would call a real mission, we had flown a lot of patrol missions. We didn't even count those at the first, the ones over the hump. But the first mission was to attack a Japanese supply depot near Missional Aerodrome. And we carried 1,000-pound bombs and a full load of ammunition, dropped the bombs, went in and strafed everything we could find that looked like it was a strafing target, and came on home.
Well, we were really raising hell with the neighborhood, weren't you?
We were, yes.
Well,
good.
Yeah, I bet it did, because you know we were in a fight for our life. We weren't sure how this thing was going to turn out. You know, by then we'd lost the Philippines. You know,
well, they had lost everything from the South China Sea all the way around through Borneo, Malaysia,
Singapore,
up, the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
To
talking about your mission in December 1943, I do believe that's the year.
Yes.
And tell me about your airplane. What was on the side of your airplane?
Well, you know, the Flying Tigers had the sharks.
They were very
mouth
famous.
painted on
Very,
there.
very famous.
We figured that the Japanese were very superstitious, and anything that resembled death was something they didn't like. So we decided to put a skull on ours, and along with the skull, we had an air siren in the group. You had to give up your external hard point to use that, but sometimes we would put a siren on the first airplane going in, and when we started a dive bombing run, we'd pull a string on the siren, and it would scream down as we started.
Well, no, was it air driven?
Air driven, yes.
Did it have a little propeller on it?
It looked like a honeycomb,
Mm-hmm.
and it would the impeller would move back and forth a little, and it made a pretty terrifying sound.
Well, you know, the Germans did something similar on the Stuka bombers. They had a whistle or something and screamed as they dove down, and to frighten the people. Well, okay. Well, tell me about your mission then.
Well, I'd been off on a hump patrol, and we were advised that there were. I had been on an early morning hump patrol, three and a half hours, had just landed, and we were advised that Japanese were expected to attack almost any time. My airplane had just barely been refueled when the alert scramble went off, and I ran and jumped in my airplane.
Do you had ammunition? Was it
Yes,
loaded up?
I always had it loaded up.
Mm-hmm.
They say I went airborne by the tower in 25 seconds, but I think it was more like about 45. We were supposed to...
They caught you on the ground, you were really in trouble.
Yeah. We were supposed to rendezvous over the field at 20,000 feet. And the only other airplanes on the field were the three other members of my flight crew. Apparently, they didn't get their airplane serviced quick enough. And they wound up having to sit out, or at least two of them sat out the whole attack. One did get airborne. But anyway, on the way up to 20,000 feet, I got up to about 12,000, and I saw something in the distance that looked like 4 airplanes. But it was a very hazy day, and it was hard to make anything out. So I called control and asked them if they had any friendlies in the area, and they said no. And I said, well, I see a flight of 4 about 15 miles to the east. Oh, no, that can't be. We have a report from ground observers that there are airplanes 40 miles to the east. And so I made another circle, and I could see them better, and I said, I'm not sure that's just 4 airplanes, and they're 15 miles to the east. I'm going to go take a look. So I kept climbing, and eventually I got up close enough to see that it wasn't a flight of 4 airplanes. It was 4 flights of bombers, and there were 6 bombers at each flight.
Oh, wow!
And it was so hazy.
And you were out there by yourself, basically.
By myself, yeah. And so I told them what I was seeing, and I hadn't seen the fighters yet because it was so hazy that it was hard to make anything out. And by the time I got up above the bombers, I looked around and there were fighters all over the place. And gee whiz, I've never seen this many airplanes in the air at one time before in my life. And apparently they didn't notice that I wasn't one of them. And they got clear up on top above everybody. And I called control and said, those airplanes that I told you about are bombers, and they're headed northwest on 335-degree heading. I think they're going to make 180 come back over your base and bomb you. Oh, no, it couldn't be. They're farther to the east. So I watched, and pretty soon I said, yep, they're coming for you, and their ETA is, and I gave them a time when they could expect to be hit. And I'm sitting up there and looking around and counting, and I had to count the fighters in different quarters. It looked like there were about 10 in each quarter. So I was looking at 24 bombers and 40 fighters, and I'm up by myself, and I called and said, do you have any friendly fighters in the area? I need some help.
Yeah.
negative, negative. So they kept coming, and finally I said, well, I'm sitting up here. I'm supposed to be defending against bombers, and I'm the only one to do it. I guess I'll have to do what I can. So I called control and said I'm going to make an attack and try to fire enough rounds in the front part of them to distract their attention about the time they're trying to drop their bombs. And of course they didn't even bother to answer, but that's what I did. So I came in and started shooting across in front of them, and then level as I went around, because I knew that the bombers on the other side couldn't shoot across the bombers at me. So I swung around in behind, and I finally wound up on the tail end Charlie of the bomber stream, and I came screaming up on him, shooting at his left engine, and I could see a lot of bullets hitting the left engine. But by that time, with my overtake, I had to duck under him to keep from hitting him. And I knew there was going to be a bunch of zeros after me, so I did the escape maneuver that I had planned, which was stick all the way forward, hard forward as far as you could, and do an outside negative G roll. And you can't follow one of those, to predict where they're going to be to shoot at you. So I didn't get a hit. And so I pulled back out, started climbing back up. And of course, they dropped their bombs by that time. But I climbed clear back up on top again. And I thought, well, I got a lot of ammunition left. I'll have a go at the bombers again. So I come in and started an attack on them. I didn't even get close. There were zeros coming in everywhere you could think of, and so I decided to get the hell out of there.
Yeah.
So I did the same thing again, pull back up on top, and I figured, well, I'm up above all the zeros. I'll pick out the highest one on top and the one that's least likely to be able to do any damage, and I'll shoot at him. So I did, and I came in, and I was getting some good shots on him, and I could see I was getting some hits, but again, I was closing too fast, so I had to go under him and go through another escape maneuver. And the same thing happened. I climbed back up on top again, and this time I said, well, I can't get to the bombers, so I'm going to see if I can't shoot down the fighters. So I picked the one on top and started an attack on him again, and I got in pretty close and got some hits and ran into the same problem again, and I got away again. Well, I should have learned my lesson, but I kept going, and we were a long ways from home at that time. And finally, I got to where it looked like all the zeros were kind of like alongside and up ahead and above the bombers. So I thought, well, I'll have another go at the bombers this time. So I come in trying to get close to the bombers, and that was a big mistake. Before I could get close, I could see zeros coming in every way imaginable. So I roll over and start into the escape maneuver again, and I could see a zero coming up at me, and he was shooting at me. I had to stick all the way forward and push him, trying to get out of his line of fire, and it just wasn't working. So I grabbed the trim tab and wound it all the way forward. And about that time, it sounded like somebody threw a bucket of gravel into the back of my airplane, and something hit the canopy. And about that time, fire came shooting up around both sides of the armor plate.